Okay, kids, so continuing with our study of the preterite tense, or a past tense in Spanish. And again, we're just focused on conjugating in the preterite. So continuing with our study of the preterite tense, we are moving on to part 2 here, which are car gazar verbs, which is to say verbs that end in the combination of letters of car, gar, and zar, car gazars. In preterite part 1, we looked at regular present tense, AR verbs and ER verbs and IR verbs, and this is a second different and distinct group. So we're going to start with the verbs that end in car. And you have seen a few examples of these types of verbs before. Take a minute and think of some verbs that you may know that end in car, such as sacar, like to take or take out or take pictures, tocar, to touch, play a musical instrument, and buscar, to look for. Now there are many other examples of these, of course, but these are three that you're pretty familiar with. Sacar, tocar, buscar, they all end in car. Now, before we get into conjugating these verbs, I think it's important that you understand the theory behind why these verbs do what they do. And if you can understand why they function the way they function, it'll end up making a lot more sense to you than it just does it because it does it. So, I'm going to put down a list of words that all start with the letter C. Okay? If you notice, what I'm doing here is I'm giving you a list of words that start with the letter C, where the C that starts each word is followed by a different vowel. So an A, an E, an I, an O, or a U. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through this list of words, and we're going to pronounce them. And we have to determine whether the C that's in the word is a hard C sound, like a K, almost like a K would make in English, or it's a soft C sound, like a S, almost like an S would sound in English. Okay, so the first word I run across is casa, and that's a hard C sound, so I'm just going to write H for hard, casa. That's why the word is pronounced casa and not sasa, casa. Cena, cena, it's a soft C sound. Ciudad, ciudad, again, a soft C sound. Comer, comer, it's a hard C sound. Otherwise, I'd have somer. And the last word I have is cuidado, cuidado, also a hard C sound. Now, what we've done here is we've established a pattern that can be applied throughout Spanish and pronouncing the Spanish language. So, the letter C, when it comes before an A, an O, or a U, it makes a hard C sound, always. And that doesn't matter whether the C is at the beginning of the word or in the middle of the word. It doesn't make a difference, okay? For instance, in this word for a cow, vaca, that C is still a hard sound, okay, because it comes before an A. And it doesn't really matter whether the C is in the beginning of the word or the middle of the word. When it comes before an A, an O, or U, it's going to make a hard C sound. When it comes before an E or an I, it's going to make a soft sound. And that's always the case, always, no matter what. And that, again, it doesn't matter if that C is at the beginning of the word or in the middle of the word or the end of the word, okay? For instance, the word educación, okay? This C comes before an A, so it's a hard sound. This C comes, right here, this C comes before an I, so it's a soft sound. Educación, educación. So again, the letter C, when it comes before an A, an O, or a U, it's a hard sound. And when it comes before an E and I, it's a soft sound, always. Now, what does that have to do with what we're looking at here with these car gazar verbs? Well, what happens is this. If we were to take a verb like sacar and look at it, okay, so it ends in AR. Now, what have we been working on? AR verbs, ER verbs, and IR verbs. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to almost pretend conjugate this. I'm going to conjugate it incorrectly. I'm going to take away my AR, and I'm going to put on my endings for AR verbs in the preterite, which, as we learned, is an E with an accent mark. So here's the problem I've created for myself. I have the verb sacar, pronounced sakar. I have a hard C sound in there. Why do I have a hard C sound? Because that C comes before an A. Now I've taken that verb and I now have sase. Why? Well, now I have a C before an E, so I have a soft C sound. That is a problem. In Spanish, when you conjugate a verb, the conjugation forms of that verb should look like and sound like the original. They should look like and sound like the infinitive. They should look like and sound like the verb from which they came. Okay, so this idea of sase doesn't really work. It doesn't really work. I need to get a k sound back in there. Well, how do we do that in Spanish? Well, the answer is, in Spanish, we don't use K's, we use QU's. So the yo form of sacar is sake. Q-U-E, sake. And now I have something that sounds a lot better. It sounds like it comes from sacar, sake. Now here's the deal with Car-Gazar verbs. Once you get past their yo forms, you can just conjugate them like a normal AR verb in the preterite. If we look at sacar, for instance, sake, sacaste, sacó, sacamos, sacastes, and sacaron. These other 5 forms after yo, I don't need to change them at all because they keep that hard C sound. Why? Well, because they come before A's or they come before O's, and I'm okay with that. I only have to change the yo form. And you're going to find that's applicable to the car verbs, the gar verbs, and the zar verb. So the rule here, the rule that we need to know, is that the yo form with car verbs is going to become Q-U-E with an accent mark. Q-U with an accent mark to help preserve the sound of the verb. So for instance, if I were working with buscar, my yo form would be yo busqué. If I were working with tocar, my yo form would be yo toque. And again, once I get past those yo forms, they're just normal verbs. So say I wanted the L form of buscar, I would just have busco. So only that yo form is going to change. Only the yo form. Okay, so in continuing with our look at Car-Gazar verbs, we're going to move on to the verbs that end in gar. And again, there are many examples of these types of verbs, but a couple that you're familiar with are verbs like llegar, pagar, and jugar. Okay, and just like what we did before, gar verbs are the same concept as the car verbs that we just looked at. So again, a list of words that begin with the letter G. And again, what I'm trying to determine here is if that G makes a hard G sound like G, or a soft G sound like H, almost like an H in English. So we have the word gato, hard. Genial, the word for cool, genial, soft. Gitano, for gypsy, again, soft. Gota, hard. That's the word for drop in Spanish. And guitarra, a hard sound. So just like with the C, the letter G, when it comes before an A, an O, or a U, it's going to make a hard sound. When it comes before an E or an I, it's going to make a soft sound. And again, it does not matter whether or not that G comes at the beginning of the word, the middle of the word, wherever in the word. When it comes before an A, an O, or U, it's hard. And when it comes before an E or an I, it's going to be soft. So again, what does that have to do with the verbs that we're looking at? Well, we take a verb like llegar. I take away my AR, and if I were to almost pretend conjugate this, what I would come up with in the yo form is an E with an accent mark, and I've taken llegar and turned it into yehe. Again, that doesn't work because I need to preserve the sound of the verb to make it sound like the original, make it sound like the infinitive, make it sound like the verb from which it came from. In order to do that here, what we're going to do is, not going to do this, we're going to add a U in there. So the yo form is going to become yay gay. Yay gay. Just going to add this U right here. Again, it's the same as the car verbs. Once you get past the yo form, you can conjugate these gar verbs like you would any other AR verb in the preterite. Why? Well, because in these other forms, my G comes before either A's or O's, and therefore it's still a hard G sound, and that's exactly what I'm looking for. So the only one that's different, just like the car verbs, is just the yo form. So my rule here is that in the yo form, the gar verbs become gay. So yegar, yegay. Pagar, pagay. Hugar becomes hugay. We will discuss in a later video why hugar is not a stem changer anymore, why it's not huege, it's just hugay. This is actually correct, and we will discuss that in a later video, but this is the correct form of hugar, hugay, pagay. And again, if I want to do a different form, like the L form of pagar, it would just be pago, just a normal verb. Alright, so the last part of the car-gazar verbs are the verbs that end in zar, Z-A-R. And some examples of verbs that you're already familiar with would be verbs like cruzar, to cross, almorzar, to have lunch, and empezar, to start or begin. Comenzar is another example. And again, just like the car verbs and the gar verbs, we've kind of gotten to the point where we understand the concept before that we're working with here, which is with C's and G's and Z's, when they come before A's and O's and U's, they make a hard sound. And when they come before E's and I's, they make a soft sound. So in order to preserve the sounds of the verb, we have to change them a little bit. So if we were to take a look at cruzar, for instance, I would take away my AR, and I would put on my ending in the yo form, which is an E with an accent mark, and I get cruzy. Okay, cruzy. And I have to make it sound like cruzar, cruzar. So in order to fix this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little spell change here. I'm going to get rid of this Z, and I'm going to replace it with a C. Because that's how we make that S sound in Spanish. We don't really use the S here, we use the C. Because C's before E's and I's, as we've already learned, make a nice soft sound for us. So the actual conjugation in the yo form is going to be cruce. And again, once you get past the yo form, the zar verbs, just like the gar verbs and the car verbs, are completely normal AR verbs. Cruzaste, cruzó, cruzamos, cruzastes, cruzaron. Okay? So only the yo form is going to be different. So again, the rule is going to be yo goes to C, E, accent mark. So almorzar, almorcé in its yo form, empezar, empecé in its yo form. I know that you know that both of these verbs are stem changers in the present tense, but if you notice, there's no stem change here. Again, we will address that in another video, but just as a little preview, AR verbs, as well as ERs actually, but AR verbs in the preterite never stem change. Never. And that's not just talking about the boot or anything like that. It's just they don't stem change, period. So you don't have to worry about that. So again, to summarize what we've done today, car-gazar verbs, they have to change in their yo form to help preserve the sound of the original verb. Car verbs become K. Gar verbs, gay. And zar verbs, say. After those yo forms, they're completely normal. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me in class.